Howdy gamers, let's talk about the runes for Neeko mid lane. If you're considering her support, there's really a lot of better options, mainly being Zyra if you're looking for a mage support, and then if you're looking for an engaged support, Leona does everything that Neeko's support wants to do, but in a lot safer of a manner, as she's dealing about the same amount of damage, and then also surviving while doing so. But like if you're really looking to play her support, I suppose you'd go Aftershock, Font of Life, Bone Plating, Overgrowth, and then with Perfect Timing and Biscuits, but not the main reason you'd play Neeko. I think her only viable role is really mid lane with how she functions right now. And with Neeko, you have to understand that like her cooldowns are pretty static, and even with a lot of cooldown reduction, you're still pretty capped at like the cooldowns on her abilities, and where you're combating a lot of champions, especially Season 10 champions that are effectively never on cooldown. You either have to have immediate impact or have like a buffer between the abilities to be useful at all. So I think your only good viable keystone options are going to be Electrocute or Glacial Augment, with Glacial Augment being the more useful. But you definitely have a solo queue advantage with Electrocute, as it is just offering you damage that you otherwise wouldn't have. But starting off with Glacial Augment, basic attacking an enemy champion will slow them, and the slow duration increases. The slow amount increases throughout the duration. And since you're ranged, the slow amount is lower, but whenever you get active items, you also, the active items will create a zone around the enemy once they connect, and then that slows them by 60, and then also slows all units around them by 60%. So with that, you create a pretty good buffer in between the cooldowns of your abilities. So let's say you throw out an EQ, you're on cooldown even if you have 40% CDR for at least 3 seconds. And then if you use your GLP active and then you freeze ray the enemy, you really have a lot of time to play with. You also become more potent into dive comps, as even though Neeko's ult can be used as like a wombo or like an engage tool, it really is better used as a defensive tool, as it has this channel time, and it's also very, very hard to get Neeko like on top of enemy champions. If you really start looking at her kit as a defensive kit, then it all starts making a lot more sense. And Glacial Augment helps you and your team in neutral situations, because you could set yourself up for skill shots with the freeze rays. You can also set your team up to deal damage whenever you're on cooldown too. So there's a lot of utility in it. In the laning phase, a lot of what you're doing is building up your 3 auto stack with the W, and then with that 1 auto on the enemy, you're going to slow them, and then that can set you up for an E through the minions into your Q, and that's a really good trade. And then even when you're on cooldown too, your auto attacks will be slowing. So you add a lot of functionality in what Neeko wants to do. The itemization path for Glacial Augment is also pretty good for her in GLP and Twin Shadows. Both items giving her about what she wants early. You would complete GLP, you can complete Sword Pin Boots after that, and then Twin Shadows, and then you can go into Death Cap or Leandries after those. And with that, you have these 2 slow active items. So long that you don't use them both right after the other, then you're going to have a lot more CC effectively against the enemy team, especially when you're fighting around objectives, which is a lot of what the gameplay comes down to. So with Glacial Augment, you end up in the Inspiration Tree. So for the secondary runes, you have good options in Perfect Timing or Magical Footwear. If you're playing into dive comps, like I said, Perfect Timing might be gives you more personal defense against them. With the recent nerf to Perfect Timing, you get it at 14 minutes. So even against champions like Zed, Talon, Kiana, etc., you're not really negating their level 6 power spike anymore, or even like their level 10. They're going to be able to ult you multiple times before you have access to the Perfect Timing. If the game's going even. So yes, you can get this free stopwatch, but you get it way later in the game now. So I think you're better off going with Magical Footwear, as you're really trying to accelerate your build path with Neeko, as you're building the GLP first, and then with Magical Footwear, you're going to be offsetting the cost of boots by 300 gold, obviously, and then that lets you itemize into Sword Pin Boots, into Fiendish Codex, that's going to build into Twin Shadows faster, at a way faster rate than you otherwise would be able to. And building into Zhonya's is really, really expensive for Neeko, and then also not so necessary, especially if you're not looking to engage. If you're looking to play her defensive, everything just works out better. For the third runes here, you have good options in Minion Dematerializer or Biscuit Delivery. With most champions, you want to use minion dematerializer on the caster minions 3 times so that you one-shot the backline. But Neeko doesn't need this, as you combo your E with your Q anyways on the minion wave. So with that, you're going to be killing the backline minions anyways at most stages of the game. So Biscuit Delivery is completely fine. Biscuit Delivery, you gain a total biscuit of everlasting will at every 2 minutes until 6. The biscuits restore 10% of your missing health and mana. Consuming a biscuit or selling the biscuit permanently increases your maximum mana by 50. So it can be used as a laning tool, but it's mostly just for the mana offered. Especially in the early game, it lets you cast your abilities 1 or 2 more times than you otherwise would be able to without having to recall. You also have the option of Futures Market. Futures Market utility is so that you can get back to lane with a Lost Chapter at certain timings that you otherwise wouldn't be able to. And if you're coming back to lane with a Lost Chapter, then you create a lane advantage in which you can lock the enemy mid laner into the lane because you're permanently pushing waves into them, and then you can look to farm your raptors, and that's where you really start snowballing things. If you can permanently keep the enemy mid laner in lane with the wave push into them and you're farming both teams' raptors, you just get so far ahead of the enemy champion that Futures Market is going to pay for itself really quickly. Where Neeko has a pretty cheap build, it can also help you mid to late game when you're looking to complete full items, especially something like Death Cap. Usually worth going into debt for around like a 28-minute Baron fight or whatever. So if you are playing in matchups in which the wave clear game can be played, I would recommend Futures Market for that reason, as it's the most dominant. But if you're playing into melee matchups or something, Biscuit Delivery is completely fine too. But a default, I would go with Futures Market. For the 4th rune, you have okay options in Approach Velocity and Cosmic Insight. I'm kind of torn on the two, as Approach Velocity is okay, but again, I think you should be looking to play Neeko defensively. But with Approach Velocity, whenever you land an E on the enemy, it's going to set you up for an ult. If you land all the GLP items become more useful too. So the 5% cooldown reduction is good on Neeko, but I think since you have the ability to combo it with your E, not just the GLP items, it does gain a lot of utility. It also gives you a lot of leniency in like your skill level, because with the GLP items, or with the glacial items, you're going to be slowing the enemy, and then that's going to be giving you movement speed towards them. So that makes it easier if you're over kiting or something to get back in range to land your ability. So there's a lot of utility in Approach Velocity, and it's just easier. With Cosmic Insight, you get 5% cooldown reduction on your abilities, summoner spells, and items. That's useful as well. So you are giving off a pretty good trade-off for this, but it is easier to use Approach Velocity. They're both really good, man. I guess defaultly, I would recommend Approach Velocity, but I think if you're a higher MMR, Cosmic Insight is going to be giving you better value. Just more abilities, summoner spells, and the item CDR is really valuable. And then with the Glacial page, you're inevitably going to end up with Domination with Cheap Shot and Ingenious Hunter. Cheap Shot gives you bonus true damage against enemies with impaired movement or actions whenever you damage them, and then it's only on a 4-second cooldown, so you have multiple ways to proc this a lot of times throughout an all-in, and then you're effectively just getting more damage because of it. With Ingenious Hunter, you gain active item cooldown reduction, and then for each unique takedown, you gain more and more active item cooldown reduction. So it's pretty easy for Neeko to get a lot of kills and assists with the nature of how her kit functions. So she's one of the champions that can stack this up, and since you're the mid laner too, it gets really brutal once it's fully stacked for the enemy too, as your GLP and Twin Shadows are on really low cooldowns. It makes fighting around objectives just a nightmare for the enemy, especially if they start a Baron. Like, you're basically like Lysandra whenever they're starting a Baron. So for the shards, it's going to be, you have good options in attack speed or adaptive force. I think attack speed is going to be helping you in most lanes, because early it's mostly about your auto attacks on the wave versus your abilities. If you have the attack speed, it helps you manage the wave while also poking the enemy with your abilities versus just having a little bit of extra AP. If anything, if you're looking to all in your abilities and looking to scale, then you would take the cooldown reduction shard. With attack speed though, since you have the W passive and the on-hit damage, it just makes a lot of sense, and it's really useful, especially in your early levels, which is when Neeko's weaker anyways. And then it's going to be adaptive force, and then depending on your matchup, you want to switch the last resistance, whether it be armor or magic resist, depending on your matchup. So if you're playing into Lucian, Kiana, etc., you want the armor, and then if you're playing into an AP matchup, you obviously want the magic resist, champions like Syndra, Orianna, etc. And that's really it for Neeko runes. Well, actually, I forgot to mention Domination. with Domination, it's just a simpler option. You simply deal more damage with it, but it's just not as good as Glacial. But if you're only on stage 1 of like playing League of Legends where you just can't solo kill your lane opponent, Domination's going to help you do that, because once you land your EQ ult on someone, you're simply dealing more damage with it. So with the Keystone, it's going to be Electrocute. The reason you would go Electrocute over something like Predator or Dark Harvest, Predator gives you extra movement speed active on your boots. It's going to help you roam, but Neeko doesn't need that. It's kind of the same as like running Predator on Malzahar. You show up to that lane, but since your abilities just aren't tiered to be used offensively as well as other champions, then you might as well be playing another champion if you're running something like this. With Dark Harvest, you get a little bit more damage against champions who are lower, but it's mostly about adding to your overall burst than it is about getting extra damage on targets who are low. With Electrocute, it's going to give you lethals you otherwise wouldn't have, and if you're running this, please run Ignite. With Glacial, you should probably be running TP, but with this, definitely run Ignite if you're just playing to kill your lane opponent. With Electrocute, hitting an enemy champion with 3 separate attacks or abilities within 3 seconds deals bonus adaptive damage, which is based off your level and then your bonus AP, and is on a 25-second cooldown. So it can be used as a laning tool since it's only a 20-second cooldown. Anytime you're landing your full combo, you're going to be proccing it. And with that, it's just simply giving you more damage. You could run Sudden Impact. With Sudden Impact, after you exit Stealth, use a Dash, Leap, Blink, Teleport, etc. So basically, anytime you use your W, Flash, or Proto Belt, you would gain 7 Lethality and 6 Magic Penetration. Since you have the W active to go invisible, you can use Sudden Impact. And if you're running Electrocute, I really think you should run it, as you're just getting access to damage that you otherwise wouldn't have. And then if you're building something offensive like Proto Belt, you're going to have more ways to proc it in a team fight, or just in general. So, and then that's just other damage, access to damage that you otherwise wouldn't have. Pretty similar to Electrocute. Something like Taste of Blood is a good laning tool, but if you're running this, you're already saying like you're going to beat your lane opponent regardless. Like you don't care about matchups. So that's really how I see it. And then for the third rune, I think you're best off with going with Zombie Ward. Since Neeko on your first or second recall, you're going to have the control over the wave. Zombie Ward, even if you start Sweeper level 1, just pay attention to when the enemy mid laner wards, and then you sweep that ward. That's going to give you a ward now, and then in your own lane, and then it's also going to give you bonus ability power for doing so. You could go Eyeball Collection, which is going to give you the bonus ability power offered through getting kills or assist, but Zombie Ward's going to be a bit more consistent, especially since you should be playing for lane if you're running something like this. And then for the fourth rune, you have good options in Ravenous Hunter or Relentless Hunter. I think, I don't know, they're all pretty low value, honestly, if you're running something like this for Neeko in the mid lane. Ultimate Hunter, the cooldown reduction offered is kind of whatever, especially where Neeko's ult is so low cooldown anyways. Ravenous Hunter, you're going to be healing, but it's only healing off your abilities. And once you spend your burst initially, you're on cooldown, and then therefore you don't have abilities to heal yourself once you're starting to take damage, like in retaliation from the enemy champion. So I think Relentless Hunter is actually going to be your best bet. Relentless Hunter is going to help you reset to lane since you're not running TP, and it's also going to help you move to side lanes or to fights faster. So that's really that. And then for the secondary runes, you have a really greedy option in Coup de Grace and Presence of Mind. Coup de Grace, you deal more damage to champions who are below 40% health, and then Presence of Mind, takedowns restore 20% of your maximum mana and then permanently increase your mana by 100. So really just helps you if you're permanently fighting in all lanes and all lanes, every part of the jungle, etc. A more scaling option would be something like Mana Flow and Transcendence, but other champions just use this better than Neeko does. So I really don't see huge value out of that compared to other champions. With Inspiration, it's kind of the same deal, where you could have something like Biscuit's Cosmic Insight, but you should really just be all-ending your damage at that point. So if you're running this and you're really playing for your lane and really playing to, like, I suppose, not only solo kill your lane opponent multiple times, but then 1v9 the game, then you should look to run Presence of Mind, Coup de Grace, because you're just getting access to mana for getting kills and assist, and then you're also getting access to damage to targets who are lower that you otherwise wouldn't have. So it's going to help you like one-shot one target, and then the next, and then the next, and then the next. And then with Presence of Mind, the 20% mana refund whenever you get a kill or assist opens up your itemization options, because if you're building like Proto Belt into Oblivion Orb into Sorkpin Boots, or Sorkpin Boots into Oblivion Orb, you don't have to build a mana item if you're killing your lane. And in combination with blue buff, you don't have to build a mana item. And with that, if you're like killing one champion, you're probably running out of mana. And then with Presence of Mind, if you get the kill or assist, you're going to have enough mana to cast another rotation of your E and W, or your E and Q. So really, really solid option. And then the rune shards wouldn't change. So that's what I think about Neeko mid lane runes. I think Glacial is better, but I mean, if you're going to play this champion solo queue, you really might as well just play to solo kill or something versus having the extra utility, unless you're at a significantly higher MMR. I'm talking like Grandmaster in your region. So that's that. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I answer literally all of them. If this video helped you, leaving a like on the video helps me. And if you're interested in watching me play or talk about League of Legends, you can check out my Twitch. It's twitch.tv/SawyerNelson. Fun fact, not so fun actually. I at one point last season, Nautilus was the top support, and I practiced a shit ton of Neeko support because the way her W used to work was that you could use the W active, and then it would the clone would immediately block Nautilus hook. But then they just suddenly changed that after I had like, I don't know, like 60 or 70 games of Neeko support. They just changed that, and then the pick was ruined. After the nerfs to top lane, it hurt her even more, so that was really lame, man. Neeko support was a really unique pick into Nautilus, and they just killed it when I was the only one fucking playing it. It was so bizarre, man. Whatever. Cool champion, though. Like, the disguise shit into the ult, wow. But, like, player defensive. Player defensive, please? Like, please just player defensive. You're really not, like, Galio or something. Come on.